Perone's the name. Propagation is the game this week in On the Ledge. And I just love that moment when you pull out a cutting from the water and what do you find? Hallelujah, it's roots. Welcome to the show. If you're a new listener, I am your host, Jane Perone, guiding you step by step through the world of houseplant ownership. And this week, we're finding out how to make more plants. Oh gosh, you say, I've got quite a few already. Yes, but these you can share with your friends. My guests this week, Rose Ray and Caro Langton, are the founders of the green interior company Roco, based in the British seaside town of Margate. Their first book, House of Plants, was an international hit, and now their new work, Root, Nurture, Grow, is about to be published. And it's on the much needed topic of plant propagation, covering everything from air layering to root shoots to propagation chambers and beyond. I was lucky to get an advance copy of this book, and let me tell you, it's really, really beautiful and also useful, which is a very good combination. I gave Rose and Caro a call and spoke to them about the book. Given that they live by the seaside, you might hear some rather atmospheric seagull noises in the background of this interview, but hopefully it enhances the mood. As ever with interviews, I got a little bit off-piste right from the start, so apologies if you're not a dog lover, because we start off talking about our dogs Huxley and Wolfie, so you might want to fast forward if you're not a fan of the canine, but otherwise do dip in and enjoy this interview. I'll be back halfway through to tell you about this week's sponsor, thejoyofplants.co.uk, and to bring you a Q&A on Oxalis triangularis. But now let's get knee-deep in cutting compost with Rose and Caro.
So I'm Caro, and so there's two of us, Caro and Rose, and with also Huxley the dog, who occasionally pops up on social media. And Huxley's my dog, who I adopted a few years ago, and we're going to start showing him more because we feel like people want to see more of him. But I deal with more of the kind of, I suppose, the photography and the social media and the branding side of the company. So I've sort of naturally fallen into different roles within the company, and I sort of deal more with that side of things.
Yeah, and I'm Rose. Originally from Buckinghamshire, and we both moved to Margate, about a year and a half now. And yeah, I've been doing Roco now for about 4 years, which is absolutely amazing. I can't believe 4 years has gone so quickly. And I do more of the plant installation side of the business, and just kind of dealing with installing all the weird and wonderful plants into kind of workspaces and different restaurants. We both really love it.
So you're working out of the Margate area in the UK, and your
Yes.
customer base is far and wide, I imagine.
Yeah, we started in London. We had a stall on Broadway Market when we first began. We were actually making gardening products then. Rose had started casting concrete pots and making terrariums and things, and we started there with a market stall. So we grew a community of people mainly around East London. And then as we've grown and moved more to, I suppose, the sort of greater London area and online, especially with our books being published, I think our audience has expanded now, and our first book was translated into, I think it's about 8 languages now. So with Instagram and online, our community is quite far reaching now, which is really lovely. Obviously, you can see on Instagram when you've got a business profile where your customers are, and lots of them are in America and Australia. So it's really lovely to know that it's spread like that, and that we're actually getting questions and inspiration from people all over the world now.
That's wonderful. Just tell me about Huxley briefly. I may cut this, but I just need to know about your dog first before we go any further.
So Huxley, if anybody wants to walk a dog but can't look after a dog full time, there's an organisation called, I'm not palming him off onto people, but there's an organisation called the Cinnamon Trust, and they're based in Cornwall, and they basically link people who can no longer walk their dogs or look after their pets with people who want to help but can't own a pet for themselves. So I was connected to my neighbour Thea, who had 2 border terriers, and I walked walked them for her for a few years on Hampstead Heath, which kind of transformed my life and made me so much happier. And unfortunately, she passed away, so I ended up adopting the dogs.
Oh,
Huxley
so
now
lovely.
lives with us in Margate.
Oh, that's so lovely. Well, funnily enough, I am a Cinnamon Trust volunteer as well. Although
really?
I don't currently have a
Brilliant.
dog, but I used to walk a white Alsatian. And I was really expecting when I signed up that I was going to get like a pug or a Yorkshire Terrier. And then they phoned up and said, yeah, we've got this white Alsatian that we need to walk. And her owner moved away, but she was a really lovely dog and it was such a pleasure to do. So yay for the Cinnamon Trust.
Yeah,
They're
absolutely.
a fantastic charity, and so nice that you managed to take on the dogs. So that's such a sweet story.
I know. And actually, my mum has Boudica, the slightly more high maintenance pooch, is now in Birmingham with my mum. But they see each other very often, and it keeps us sane.
Yes.
So
I need to make a podcast about dogs, don't I? Really?
Yes.
Yeah,
oh,
definitely.
please. And I always used to think, God, I wish I'd just photographed people and their dogs on the heath, because the characters you meet on the heath, well, anywhere you dog walk, I think it's such a great way to actually meet new people when you move to a new place. So, dog walking is the best.
Definitely. Well, my dog he's not here at the minute, actually, but sometimes you might hear him on the podcast jingling about in the background when he's sort of getting himself settled on his bed. Yes, so we do have Wolfie is a feature of my podcast as well. And you can see some pictures of him on my Instagram. And I only put him on occasionally because, like you, my Instagram is mainly photographs of plants. But when I do, people are like, more Wolfie. So yeah. There you
But
go.
I think that's because it's kind of one of the things we were going to say is sort of this idea of nurturing and of people. It's kind of the same part of your brain, isn't it? Of like just wanting to care for something and help it grow. And I think it sort of taps into the same mindset. Plants and dogs
Definitely.
and cats.
It's
The same person.
cats.
Yeah.
People love cats and plants.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I've gone off a bit, as usual, I've gone a bit off piece from the very start, which is fairly typical of me. I apologise. But let's come back round to your new book, Root, Nurture, Grow, The Essential Guide to Propagating and Sharing Houseplants. I'll put full details of this in my show notes, but it's published by Quadrille. And how excited am I about this book? Very excited. I have said in the past that, gosh, I should really write a book about propagation, but I'm really glad that you guys have done it because I know how much work it is to write a book and it's no joke. So I know you put tons of effort into this and it's come out as a really beautiful book. Tell me a bit, Rose, about why you decided to focus on propagation of houseplants as a subject for a book.
Well, Caro and I, when we were kind of writing our first book, we accumulated lots and lots of really amazing, weird and wiggly plants. And then when I moved to Margate about 2 years ago, we had to split everything up and we started researching a little bit into kind of how to propagate them and we just realized that there was no definitive guide on how to do that. And so we've created a book that has a specific chart in it so that you can really easily look at it and be like, oh, I have this fiddly fig. How do I do this? And so we really just wanted to create a really comprehensive guide to just help people share their plants, and empower them and just kind of give them that confidence to grow and share their plants.
It's a great set of experimentation, really, isn't it? And if it goes wrong, hey, what have you lost? You've lost a leaf or something. It's not
Exactly.
It's not such a bad thing. And this is very on trend right now. Propagation Station is an incredibly popular Instagram hashtag. Little test tubes of stuff all over the place on Instagram. Why are people getting so excited about propagation, Caro?
I think for us, we found that we had an audience of people who had bought lots of houseplants, were feeling quite confident with them, had sort of filled their home as much as they possibly could, and were asking what's next. How do we, rather than going out and buying new plants, is there any way that we can, the idea of plant swapping, I think, is becoming more popular, and rather than spending lots of money and time on going out and buying plants from the shops, the idea that you could swap with people and meet new people and share the sort of backstory behind a plant, which is so lovely. Especially with friends and family, the idea that you could go round to a friend's house and see a plant you loved and take a little cutting from it. And lots of people wouldn't necessarily know if that was even possible, if the plant would survive and how to make sure it did survive. So a lot of the big element of this book is not just telling you about the techniques, but also giving you tips of how, where to look out for this, where you can do it, how you can sort of modify the tools you have. For example, taking a cutting from a friend, how would you keep it alive on the way home? There are tips like that as well included. So I think it is a sort of next step for lots of people.
And as you mentioned, Jane, I think there's a lot of people sharing pictures of plants growing in water. And I think there's something really exciting about actually seeing what's going on underneath the soil. And you spend so much time nurturing for the plants, and then actually to see that physically happening and see this new little shoot spreading out all of its new roots, it's just so exciting. That is
a lovely thing. And when you pull out a cutting and you see that there's roots forming that you didn't think were going to work, that is a real thrill. Not so exciting when you pull out a stem and realise that it's rotting away. And
yeah, exactly.
And what we do say with all of these techniques, just do lots more than you think you need, because in a way, I suppose it's the plant sort of, it's showing that it's not quite strong enough. Quite often, a cutting will root, but it's not going to be the strongest plant, and it might not survive that long. So I think it's absolutely fine to lose some and to just do more than you need, and then you won't feel too sort of sad about it.
Yeah, and then you've got something to give away to other people as well, which is always a delight. Anyone who comes to my house finds that they will get plants thrust into their hands, whether they like it or not. And are there any sort of propagation methods that are still kind of running under the radar that not everyone's caught onto, that are really worth a try for once you've done the kind of stem cuttings in water? What's the kind of next step that we should all be, the next level of propagation that we should all be going for?
Well, we're really excited about grafting. We made really good friends with someone called Brian and Linda from, they were growers of cactus from Cactus Land. And we went to a special kind of cactus convention in Herne Bay, and there were loads of really incredible grafted cacti there. And it was just amazing to see how you can basically stick two different bits of cacti together and grow these really bizarre, different shaped grafted plants together. So we kind of feel like that's a really exciting thing that people could do. And I think since we started researching into it, we've kind of seen lots of different things coming up about how you can put different coloured plants together.
It's the sort of more playful technique, I suppose. You have to be careful about making sure all of your tools are really clean, because they're a bit more susceptible to disease, but you can create the most incredible silhouettes. I don't know, have you seen much grafting, Jane? Have you?
Yeah.
It's traditionally with fruit trees, you probably hear about it more, sort of you would fuse, say, the bottom part of an apple tree that wasn't going to grow too tall with the top part of another species of apple tree that was going to grow really delicious fruit. So you'd normally use it to actually combine the characteristics of two different plants to your benefit. But with cacti, you can do it to create sort of the weirdest looking plants you've ever seen, which is really fun.
Yeah, that you do get some quite outrageous ones. The brightly coloured grafts. I can't think what the name of the species is that goes on the top. That's the one that is bright red or bright yellow. But that is an incredible. It's an incredible thing. I think some people are a bit snobby about that, but I just think it's tremendous fun. I like the I think they call them moon cacti.
Yeah, and you see, I think people perhaps think that's if you actually research grafting, you can find growers and all around the world. There's a Facebook page I found. I think it was a guy from Iran, and you see that actually what's the potential of it, because these ones obviously with plants you get from plant markets, they're so sterile and they all look identical, and I think in particular those grafted cacti, the ones we've had, don't necessarily last that long. But if you do it properly and you spend a bit of time researching it, you can do it really successfully. And you can also use it if, for example, you've got a cactus and it goes a bit mouldy at the roots, you can cut off the top section and graft it onto another, and you actually save the cactus. So there is a sort of really practical side of it as well, where you would otherwise maybe lose the plant. It's a bit like taking an offset, but you actually fuse it onto another cactus.
I think the sort of the The trendy one is the old coral cactus, cristate coral cactus, Euphorbia lactea, which you put on the top of another euphorbia, that seems to be incredibly popular now. Which it does look really groovy, it has to be said. But yeah, I like the kind of Heath Robinson, like rubber bands round the top of it. I think it's so much fun. And as you say, well, if you've got a cactus that looks like it's about to die anyway, then why not just try something really radical that might save it? And if it doesn't work, hey, it's not the end of the world. It's a fantastic thing to try. Let's go through some of the other propagation methods that you outline in the book.
Well, most of the techniques are asexual methods. So there are sexual or asexual methods with propagation, and asexual basically means that you create new plant material from existing plant material. So there's sort of obvious one, cuttings, but I think people think of cuttings of just being sort of stem cuttings, whereas actually there are about 3 or 4 different techniques. So you can cut just part of a leaf, for example, with a begonia. You could make lots of new plants just from one leaf, or you could cut a stem. You can do leaf blade cutting for example, with a snake plant, where you just cut one blade of the leaf into sections. So then we've got division, so just splitting plants. So you'd get roots, plants, leaves, you get the entire plant into different sections, which is really probably one of the easiest techniques. Grafting, which we've just mentioned. Then we've got runners. So I think one of the plants people often talk about is spider plants and their babies. They're obviously producing baby plants like mad, and it's you can take each one of those and grow a new plant from it. So there's runners, and we've got offsets. So cacti often produce little offsets. You can take those. We've got layering, which is a really incredible technique where you basically keep the plant attached while you grow new roots. So there's air layering or ground layering. Those are really, really fun to try. And then we do dip a little bit into seeds. So we kind of went through the techniques that we find ourselves doing and that we think are very accessible. So we included a bit of, we've got mini mango palms and mini date palms, mini mango trees and date palms. So you can keep your mango seeds and grow little plants from those. And it talks sort of generally about seeds, but we don't go into great depth with the seeds because growing from seed, particularly with things like cacti, does require slightly more technical tools, and you have to really keep the temperature and the humidity quite specific to do that successfully. But maybe we'll do another book in the future on that. We'll see.
Yeah, there is so much to cover, isn't there? I mean, there's just an enormous amount of different ways of doing all these things. And as you say, seed is a whole nother book there. That's
yeah.
I mean, we did on the podcast in the springtime, we did I called it the sow along, on the ledge sow along, where we got people to sow seeds, and I sowed lots of different seeds, and some of them succeeded and some of them failed, but it was great fun. But I did learn a lot about about where I was going wrong with certain things, and I've got a little tray now of cacti which are just about pea-sized,
wow.
That's quite exciting. But yeah, it's not something to do as a quick win, certainly.
No, that's it, isn't it? And I think it's kind of easing yourself into the idea of actually doing this. It's quite nice to start with the techniques that are successful, and then you sort of build your confidence and start to, if you've got time to grow from seed, then brilliant. I think for us this book is a sort of an introduction. There are lots of technical elements to it, but it's very accessible. We really feel like anybody could do this, and we found it so lovely, especially when we released our first book. We got a lot of messages from people of all different ages, from 8 to probably people in their 70s or 80s, and they're all trying it and all enjoying it. So I think it's definitely not just for a sort of trendy urbanite crowd. It's absolutely for anyone really who wants to try it. It's so easy, and you really, really do not need much in the way of tools and materials to try it.
Exactly, and there's not a lot to lose if it does go wrong. One of the questions that I get frequently and I see people asking, and perhaps you can offer up an answer on this. Say you've got, I don't know, a Tradescantia or, a fairly bog standard stem cutting in some water. And then there's a question of, OK, I'm looking at the roots and the roots are now a centimetre long or 5 centimetres long, or they're filling the whole container. What is the ideal root length to then take that cutting and put it into some soil? Because I see people getting terribly worried about this and not sure how to proceed. What's your guide on that?
Yeah, and we're asked that a lot too. It's actually quite. It's fine if they do outgrow the container. You can still use the plant. Basically, what happens is when you grow a tropical plant in water, it grows aquatic roots. So they're modified to grow in the water. And what can happen is if you leave the roots to grow too long and you transfer the plant into soil, the roots can't really adapt and you quite often find the plant dies. So the ideal length to move the plant from water is about 1 centimetre. You don't want them to grow too much more than that, ideally. Some plants like the spider plant, I mean, you can do whatever you want with them. They'll just take to soil and they're fine. But generally about 1 centimetre. And if the roots grow past that, you can actually just trim the roots back all the way down, pretty much down to the original cut, and wait for the roots to grow again. So you don't need to worry if that happens. You can trim them back. And another quite useful tip we found when we were researching the book is that if you put a stem cutting in water and the vessel that you use is a little bit smaller, obviously you want to keep refreshing the water, but what happens is the rooting hormones are more concentrated, so you'll find that the roots grow a lot quicker than if you put the stems in a huge vase that has lots and lots of water in it. It takes quite a lot longer just because the hormones are more diluted. So go for a vessel that's not too huge, a sort of smallish size. Make sure you refresh the water, and you don't have to use a transparent vessel either. The light will encourage algae growth, so isn't ideal. Obviously it's lovely to watch it happening, but you can do it in any watertight vessel. It doesn't have to be see-through.
Excellent. And tell me a bit about your rooting boosts. I found this section really interesting. You talk about hormone rooting powder, which you can buy, but then also some alternatives that you can get from your kitchen cupboards. Yeah.
So one of the themes that runs throughout the book in the text and in the photography is the idea of reusing, being resourceful with what you already have. So you see, with quite a lot of the photos, you'll see that there are modified, for example, there's a rooting chamber that's made of materials you would probably have around the house anyway. And we kind of continued that with the rooting boost because there are certain ingredients. So we've got cinnamon, honey and willow tea, which are really brilliant for rooting because they're either antibacterial or they have hormones in them or both. And when we were researching, we were using a sort of powder rooting hormone originally, and when we researched that and tried to find out what the ingredients were, it turned out that the main ingredient in these products was talcum powder, and also quite a lot of synthetic ingredients, and they are effective, but we realized that you can just use more organic ingredients. So cinnamon's a brilliant one for stem cuttings because it's antibacterial. So the main reason why a propagated plant pot would fail is that it would be vulnerable to bacteria. So by using cinnamon or honey, you can save off any bacteria from growing. And then willow tea, the willow tree, one of the reasons why it grows so quickly is that it's got a very high concentration of hormones in it. So you can take cuttings from species of willow tree and sort of boil them down and make a tea, a sort of tonic that you can use when you're trying to root new cuttings.
I kind of like the idea of hunching over a pan of boiling willow. It's got quite a sort witchy. Of a certain, quite witchy, quite. I like the idea of that. That's fantastic. This week's podcast is sponsored by thejoyofplants.co.uk. During the next couple of weeks, The Joy of Plants will be showing us all how to achieve wabi-sabi with our houseplants. Now, wabi-sabi is the ancient Japanese philosophy that's fast becoming the next big wellness trend to keep your eye on. In our plant-obsessed world, we also tend to strive for the Instagram perfect portrait of our green companions. But wabi-sabi encourages us to embrace and indeed celebrate our own imperfections, and that includes the perfect imperfections of our houseplants too. The Joy of Plants invites you to step into the home of London-based botanical artist, florist and prop stylist Yasuyo Harvey for wabi-sabi style inspiration and to get a glimpse of the gorgeous plants in her home. Visit thejoyofplants.co.uk for the latest plant-filled inspiration, care tips and DIY projects. And many thanks to The Joy of Plants for sponsoring this episode. Just check out my show notes at janeperrone.com for more information on my sponsors. Over on my Patreon feed, coming out this weekend, will be a tour of my own propagation station efforts, including a look at what I used for water propagation vessels and having a look at some of the things I've got going at the moment. So if you're a Patreon subscriber of $5 a month or more, check it out. Thank you to my new Patreon subscriber, Stephanie, this week. And if you want to join Stephanie, pop on over to janeperrone.com where you'll find full show notes for this episode, links to the book, Root, Nurture, Grow, and all the information you need to get on board with the show. Before I get back to chatting to Caro and Rose, I wanted to bring you a Q&A. And this is a bit of a tragic one. I got an email from somebody called Christina, and she wanted to know how she could get her hands on a purple shamrock plant, Oxalis triangularis, one of my favourite Latin names of all time. So she lives in the US and she wanted to get one of these plants for her brother and sister who've just moved to Crosby, England. I've never heard of Crosby. Hang on. Pause while I Google Crosby. Wow, this really is exciting podcast, isn't it? Okay, so Crosby is in Merseyside in the UK by the look of it. So that means it's near the historic city of Liverpool. So Christina was looking for a mail order source of this plant in the UK to send to her dearly beloved relatives in the UK. And she wanted me to help her find somewhere to supply that. And it was a bit of a struggle. I did find one source and emailed Christina, only sadly for the email to bounce back. So Christina, if you're listening, I hope this helps. It's not that easy at this time of year to find a source for Oxalis triangularis plants. If anyone listening from the UK knows differently, then please do let me know. There's a mail order firm called Sarah Raven, who happens to be a British gardening personality, and they seem to have seedlings in stock of this plant. But I'd definitely phone and check with them at this time of year before ordering to find out whether they will be delivered now or whether you'll have to wait until spring. And I also found that Gardens for You, another mail order website, has 10 corms of the Oxalis available for £4.50. One more note about Oxalis triangularis. I'm not necessarily recommending this as a regular source of leaves, but the leaves of the Oxalis are actually edible and they are absolutely delicious. They taste lemony and sweet. So if you ever need an interesting little garnish for your salads, and provided that, of course, that you aren't spraying anything other than water onto these plants, they are worth having a little nibble on. Usual warnings apply about allergies and so forth, even though these are not a problem to eat for most of us. Whenever you're trying a new food, you need to take care. So I'll include a link in the show notes which talks about the edibility of Oxalis triangularis and which also goes into details about its content of oxalic acid, which can be a problem for people who have certain health conditions. So do check that out. So Christina, I do hope that helps and your brother and sister are settling into life in Crosby. If you've got a question for On The Ledge, do drop me a line, ontheledgepodcast@gmail.com. And now back to my interview with Caro and Rose of Roco, and I wanted to find out from them what their favourite thing to propagate is.
Ooh, good question. I think that air layering is a technique that we only recently tried for this book, and we had a huge Dracaena plant, which came from, I used to live with my grandmother and she had lots of house plants, and when I moved I took that with me, and it was so tall. Her house was quite big and it was so tall that it was sort of outgrowing, it was sort of tickling the ceiling, and I wasn't sure how to propagate that, so I discovered air layering, and that's where you would cut the stem while it's still attached to the plant, and you wrap sphagnum moss around it and you grow the roots in the air, and then it's only once the root system has grown to quite a sort of substantial size that you would cut the stem off and transport it into soil. So that technique we found really sort of magical, because I suppose as well, it's a lot easier. The parent plant provides support and water and nutrients to the plant, the new area of growth, until it's ready to be transported. So you don't have to worry too much about keeping it at a certain temperature and keeping it watered. It sort of, the plant does it for you. So that technique we think is really brilliant. And when that works and you see the new roots growing, that's really satisfying. It takes quite a lot longer than other techniques. But if you can be patient with it, it does work.
That's a very satisfying moment when you've been thinking. I mean, I have to say I've got a terrible habit of tugging at cuttings once they've gone into the soil. If I'm rooting straight into the soil, I love it. I love to give them a tug, which is really bad practice, super bad practice. But I just can't resist it. It's just so. I've got some. Somebody sent me stems of the double Z plant, the Raven variety, and the stems weren't intact enough to root the whole stem. So I'm doing. I've got some advice from my cactus and succulent expert who said, "Yep, leaflet cuttings are the way to go." And I just can't resist having a little tug. And it's funny because you can really tell the ones that are working, because the ones that aren't working have already gone a bit, even though they're in a propagation chamber. The ones that aren't working have gone really kind of wilted, and then there's half of them are still feel really good. So I keep just kind of like I'm so silly. I should really just learn my lesson and not touch them and let them get on with it. But I don't know.
We're exactly the same. And I think the main thing that we found with our clients is that it's too much love that kills these. I mean, we install plants in sort of workplaces around London, and we thought, nobody will water them. We provide maintenance, and we'll go in and the plants everybody's basically watering the plants. And it's always the case that everyone wants to water them. Everyone wants to care for them. Everyone's taking ownership of them and is sort of touching them and, checking if they're all right. People will be coming up and saying, is this plant all right? It looks like it's maybe not. And so quite a lot of the time is spent just kind of reassuring people that the plants they're with are happy and fine. Or we have to put sticks in to say, please don't water me, because probably about 10 people in the office think they're the sole carer of the plant. So it's brilliant. Too much love.
Given your business and the stuff you do on a day-to-day basis, can you look into your crystal balls and tell us what is going to be the next big house plant that everyone is starting to ask for, or that you're seeing proliferate on your Instagram feeds?
Oh, good question.
Sorry, I didn't prep you with that question, no. But I think it suddenly occurred to me that you guys are in a perfect position to tell me which way the wind is blowing in terms of. Can I tell you what I think? And then maybe this will inspire you. I'm thinking that other forms of monstera are becoming really big, like Carstenianum, and obviously we've had the whole Adansonii thing going on. But I think other forms of monstera are getting really, really big now.
Definitely. We would say the same, yeah.
I think there are just so many different types of philodendron available to the kind of the main type of monstera. And they just, grow so effortlessly. I think they're just, that's probably There's
the variegated monstera as well, aren't there, that you see cropping up a little bit quite often at botanical gardens and things that are really next level beautiful. I think they're slightly less resilient than a normal, but I think generally variegated plants are, aren't they? But they're really beautiful, and that's a plant we haven't really seen available to buy yet. But I think from talking to our suppliers, we have suppliers in the Netherlands, and they sort of say, they'll get requests, and as soon as it reaches a point, they'll then start looking to produce this plant for people. So we all just need to be demanding and shout about what we want, and hopefully we'll get them.
I guess that's what happened with the Chinese money plant. Pilea peperomioides now is pretty widely available, whereas we just couldn't get your hands on it for a while. So that's interesting. I'm going to tease you now on the variegated monstera. I actually have two Thai constellations.
Oh, do you?
They're about a foot tall now. One of them is growing a bit faster than the other, but they are very slow growing. But I have vowed that once they are at propagation stage, I'm going to do some cuttings, which I will keep exclusively for my listeners. So I'm going to have a little lottery or something when it comes to it. But they've got to get a bit bigger first, because they're still too small for propagation right now. But it's very exciting. I can't wait to get to that stage. But yes, gosh, they're selling for lots of money. A stem cutting of one of those is, I don't know, £35 or something.
Oh my gosh.
I don't know.
Gosh. The other thing I'd say is go to these, look out for these plant conventions, because what you don't get when you buy plants from, the sort of plant shops that you see around cities, they are quite sterile. They've come in straight from the supplier, probably in the Netherlands, and they're beautiful in there, but they're not necessarily, they haven't got so much character. I think it's later on, once a plant has grown into a space, that it really comes into its own, and it grows off in a strange direction, or it does something odd that makes it really feel like it's got a lot of character. And if you go to these conventions and go to independent growers, you get so much more variation and character in the plants, especially with cacti and succulents. It's such a brilliant way to find a plant that looks really established and lively and that will adapt to your home really well.
I love buying plants from individual growers. They're always a million times better compost. They're always, and they've been grown. They haven't been grown kind of soft with all the ideal conditions. They're probably a bit more hardened to your home.
Exactly.
And I love buying plants that way. It's fantastic, which is why it's so great to propagate, because then you can create those plants for other people. I've been doing some propagation of Peperomia raindrop, and I have somebody who helps me in the garden, and I said to her, "Oh, look, I've done some propagation." And she said, "I'm not really into houseplants, but I absolutely love this little Peperomia raindrop that you plant." And I said, "Well, look, have it." And she was so excited, and that's a real joy to be able to hand off a plant to somebody and think, "Oh, they're going to get something out of that." And it's a real pleasure. In fact, Peperomia propagation, I think, is one of my most satisfying things to propagate, because they're just so easy. And the leaf that I used for that Peperomia raindrop was the most battered and damaged leaf you could imagine, and it's still rooted perfectly easily. So
it's so sweet as well, isn't it, with the Peperomia, where you see this tiny little sort of mini replica pop out from the soil. We love it. The plants like that, where they throw off a replica and it's just a mini version that you can eventually pluck off, it's so brilliant.
I think I need to do a special episode on Peperomias, because they are just such a cool family. Well, it's been really lovely to speak to you, Caro and Rose, and I wish you all the best with this book. I'm just looking when it's actually, it's out?
It's October the 16th, I think.
Yeah, so it's coming very soon. I'm not sure about when it'll be out in the US, but it's a really lovely book, and I really recommend everyone takes a look. And your first book, House of Plants, is also fantastic. If anyone hasn't taken a look at that, we will. I'll put all of those details in the show notes. I want to do some air layering now. You've inspired me to do that.
Do it. And there's a lot. There are other projects in the book as well. We've got things like root shoots, which are made from air drying clay. So there's sort of good projects in there for gifting, things that you can make. Things like that. There's what are the other projects? And we've got little lino cut seed packets. So the girl Julia who designed the book is also a really amazing illustrator, and she helped us do a project with lino printing. So you can make little packets, little pouches to gift people your cuttings. So there are other projects in there as well that you can hopefully get stuck into and try out. They're all really simple, but brilliant for gifts.
I love the copper leaf rick-rack cactus leaves.
Oh, Rose made that. It's beautiful, isn't it?
That's so clever, and a really nice Christmas present idea for somebody. So that's really beautiful. So I shall definitely be giving that a go. It's a fantastic book. Thank you very much, ladies.
Thank you.
And happy propagating. Rounds up episode 66, and I'll be back next week. And breaking news, I'll be back sooner than usual, because next week is Trailing Plants Week, and I'm trying something a bit different on the podcast. Instead of putting out one podcast on a Friday, I'll be putting out 7 podcasts in a row, starting on Monday. In each episode, which will be about 5 minutes long, I'm going to profile a different trailing plant, tell you all the interesting tips and tricks around it, and bring you some stuff that you probably don't know about all of these crazy plants, from Hoya linearis to string of pearls. So join me next Monday for the first episode of Trailing Plants Week. Thanks to this week's sponsor, The Joy of Plants, and I hope we can all spend this week celebrating our perfectly imperfect houseplants. Bye! The music you heard in this week's episode was Roll Jordan Roll by the Joy Drops, Water in the Creek and Overthrown, both by Josh Woodward, all licensed under Creative Commons. See my website for details.